Today we're talking about why people quit goats. And I mean the real reasons, not just it was too hard. There are two things that send people to the exit almost every single time, and both of them are preventable. We're going to talk about fence, we're going to talk about genetics, and we're going to talk about what it actually looks like to build a system you can stay in for the long haul. Let's get to it. Hey there, welcome to GoatWise. I'm Millie Bradshaw, animal scientist and rancher. Here we talk meat goats, feeding strategies, goat fencing, and livestock management that holds up in real life. If you care about raising goats well and building systems that actually work, you're in the right place. Let's talk livestock. Before we get into the ranch update, I want to ask a quick favor. If this show has been useful to you, if you've gotten something out of it that's actually changed how you manage your operation, the best thing you can do to help it reach more people like you is leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Scroll down to ratings and reviews, tap the stars, and leave a few sentences. It takes about 2 minutes and it makes a real difference in who finds the show. And if you're not on the insider email list yet, go to goatwise.com/join. That's where I share more of what doesn't make it into the episodes. All right, here's what's happening on the ranch. The first dairy kids born last week are doing great, and the second dairy doe kidded Saturday night, another set of twin buck kids. These early dairy kids are intentional. We kid the dairy does ahead of the main herd so that by the time we need that milk for bottle babies, those kids are old enough to wean or separate. It's one of those things that takes a little planning up front, but makes kidding season a lot smoother on the back end. The grass is coming on strong right now, and last week's moisture came at just the right time. After a dry winter, we really needed it. If we can stack a few more storms through the rest of spring, it'll go a long way towards setting us up for summer. We're watching it, cautiously optimistic. In the meantime, we're ordering ear tags, checking and restocking kidding supplies, and just generally getting our act together before the main herd kids in June. And spring cleanup is well underway, taking down winter pens, spreading manure, moving animals, cleaning up the barn. Everything that accumulated over winter is getting dealt with, so we're not fighting it once things get busy. There's always more to do than there are hours in the day this time of year, but it's good work. All right, let's talk about quitting goats. I want to start there because I think it matters. Not as a cautionary tale, not as motivation, just as a real thing that happens to real people who started with the same enthusiasm you probably have, and somewhere along the way hit a wall that made them wonder if it was worth it. And in almost every case I've seen or heard about, when you trace it back, it comes down to one of two things. Either the fence failed them or the genetics failed them, sometimes both at the same time, which makes for a really bad week. I know when my own first thoughts about quitting goats happened. It wasn't a slow fade, it was a crisis. It was the year we had about 50% stillborn kids. Full term, hadn't been dead very long, maybe 24 to 48 hours, and they would die just right before they were born. We pulled dead kid after dead kid. I can't even describe what that was like after putting in a whole year of work toward that kidding season. And then the does started retaining their placentas, which was an immediate red flag for selenium. That whole thing turned out to be a mineral issue, correctable. But in the middle of it, what I knew was if it was always going to be like this, we were out. That was our show goat days, and I'll come back to that later. Let's start with fence. You've probably heard the saying, if your fence won't hold water, it won't hold goats. And I understand what people mean by that. Goats are not like cattle. They test fence, they find gaps, they are relentlessly motivated by whatever is on the other side. All of that is true, But I think the saying sets people up to either overbuild in the wrong places or underbuild in the wrong places, because it doesn't account for the variable that actually matters, which is pressure. The fence you need depends on how much pressure that fence is going to get. We build different types of fence in different locations on the ranch, and the difference comes down to one question. How motivated will the goats be to get to the other side of this fence? In our night traps, which are enclosed areas where we put the goats at night, the fence is 5-foot tall non-climb horse fence, hot wire on the inside to keep them from rubbing and pushing on it. That's a serious, expensive fence, and it's built that way on purpose. The goats are enclosed, there's nothing in there except what we give them, and there's always greener grass on the other side. They will push on that fence every chance they get. So for that location, that level of pressure, that purpose, which is keeping them in and keeping predators out, that fence is right. It does exactly what it needs to do. Now, would we build that fence everywhere on the ranch? No. Our perimeter fence is field fence, basic field fence. There are real trade-offs with that. Potential for heads stuck through the wire, predators coming in, the obvious stuff. But for what it costs and what it needs to do at the perimeter, it works just fine. The goats are not being pushed against that fence by hunger or confinement. They have forage, they have room, there's no reason to leave. Let's look at that last part a little closer, because this is where management and fence intersect in a way that people don't always see. If I graze the forage on the inside of that perimeter fence down to nothing, if I push them past what the land can give, that same fence becomes a liability. They will find a way out, or they'll hurt themselves or destroy the fence trying. A fence that is completely safe in my operation, managed the way we manage, can be a liability in your operation if you're grazing hard and they're hungry. The fence didn't change. The pressure changed. And I want to make that even more concrete, because I think it's easy to hear that and think it applies to someone else. Let's say you bring home 20 does and you put them on a few acres. That pasture looks great in April. It's probably not going to look great in June. And somewhere in late May, when the forage is getting thin and you haven't moved them yet, those goats are going to start working that fence in a way they never did in April. And if that fence is field fence, which worked great in April, you are going to start having problems. Not because field fence is bad fence, because field fence is not the right fence for that amount of pressure in that location at that stocking rate. The fix might be a different fence, or it might be a smaller herd, or a rotation, or a second pasture. But if you just blame the fence and don't address the pressure, you will be complaining about that fence all summer. On the flip side, if that pasture is going to have that level of pressure all the time, you need different fence. Make sense? So when someone tells me their goats keep escaping or getting their heads stuck in the fence and they can't figure out why, the first questions I ask are, what's the fence? Where is it? And what does the forage look like on the inside? Because the fix is not always a new fence. Sometimes the fix is better grazing management. Sometimes it's both. But you have to understand the relationship between those two things before you spend money or before you decide goats just aren't worth it. Now let's talk about genetics, because this is the one that surprises people the most. When I talk about high maintenance genetics, I mean animals that have been selected intentionally over many generations for one trait or a specific phenotype. And the thing that comes to mind first is show goats. So let's go there. And I want to be careful because I know there are show goat people in this audience, and I'm not bashing you. I know what the show goat world is doing, and I know why, because I've done it. Show goats are selected for appearance in the show ring. That's the point. That is the product. And the people who breed them are very good at it. But here's what selection for one trait does. It trades everything else. When you select hard for one thing, you are automatically selecting against or at best ignoring, everything you didn't measure. Basic production traits, parasite resistance, maternal instinct, udder structure, hardiness. There is a real and documented genetic component to parasite susceptibility, and it varies dramatically by breed and by genetic line. Some animals are just far more susceptible. And when you're managing high-end show animals with a high level of nutrition and intervention, that susceptibility doesn't show up in a way that affects your selection, so it stays in the gene pool. That's not negligence on the show breeder's part, it's just not what they're measuring. The problem is when those genetics end up in a situation where the management doesn't match the requirement. And that happens a lot because many of the available meat goats in a lot of areas are from lines that look impressive and cost a lot, but have never been asked to thrive on forage. And this isn't limited to show lines. In any commercial breeding program where we're pushing hard for maximum growth, maximum weaning weight, maximum muscle, maximum anything, we're making a trade. By selecting based on high weaning weight, we might be unintentionally selecting for more milk production than a limited forage environment can support. We might be overlooking maternal traits that keep a doe functional for 8 or 10 years. The animal that weans the heaviest kid in a high-input system is not automatically the animal that belongs in your system. I know this firsthand. Let's go back to that stillborn year. Our show goats always had a higher nutrient requirement. They were more sensitive to deficiencies than our commercial goats on the exact same forage, the exact same everything. The commercial goats thrived. The show goats struggled. And we had done well for a year or two. We thought we had the management dialed in, and then suddenly we were pulling dead kids and dealing with retained placentas, and I was standing in the barn wondering what had gone wrong. That's when I first thought seriously about getting out of goats altogether. What I didn't understand yet was that the problem had been building. The genetics had a higher requirement, and we'd been right at the edge of meeting it, and one year the mineral wasn't quite right, and the whole thing came apart. That's a genetics problem that looks like a management problem until you figure out what's actually driving it. And here's the part I really want you to hear. When you go buy goats, you don't know what you're buying. You see size and muscle and you think that's a good goat. Maybe it is. Maybe it's going to thrive in your system and produce well for years. But if you don't know anything about the genetic line you're buying into, what it's been selected for, what the requirements are, what that animal's going to need from you to stay healthy, you are taking a gamble. And the gamble has a cost that doesn't show up until you're in a kidding season that goes sideways and you have to decide whether you're still in. So what do you do about it? What I've landed on after the show goat era and the years of trial since is that we're looking for optimums, not maximums. What I mean by that is not about going small or giving up on production. It's about finding the balance point that actually works in this environment, on this forage, with this level of management. We want a weaned kid that's a good size. We are not chasing the heaviest weaned kid we can possibly produce. Because when you select hard for maximum weaning weight, you start making decisions that put too much demand on the doe. More milk, more inputs, more structural load, and you lose things that matter more over the long term. Longevity, mothering ability, parasite resistance. The doe that stays functional and productive on forage for 8 or 10 years is worth more to this operation than the doe that weans a record kid and then we're managing her problems for the next 5 years. What that balanced animal actually looks like in practice, she's structurally sound, she's a good mother, she keeps her kids alive, she breeds back reliably, and she does all of that without a lot of intervention from me. She's not winning a show class. She might not be the most impressive animal in the pen, but when I'm in the middle of kidding season and I have 100 does to watch, the animal I want is the one I don't have to think about. The one that kids on her own and has her kids up and nursing without me standing there watching. That is one of the production traits I'm selecting for, and it is directly at odds with what you get when you select for one thing only. We still pay attention to weaning weight. We're not weaning these tiny little kids because we've completely abandoned growth as a metric. That would be its own kind of error. We want acceptable size on a weaned kid. We just don't want it at the expense of everything else. The fence that fits the job, the animal that fits the land, that's the version of this that you can stay committed to. I don't think most people quit goats because goats are impossible. I think they quit because they hit a crisis moment, a catastrophic escape, a kidding season that goes wrong, a nutritional deficiency they didn't see coming, and in that moment, the gap between what they built and what the animals needed is just too wide. The goats got out because the fence wasn't right for the pressure. The kids didn't make it because the genetics needed more than the system could give. Both of those things are decisions that get made early, sometimes before you even know you're making them, and they play out later when the stakes are high and you're exhausted and you're wondering what you're doing. You build the right fence for the job, you buy animals that fit your forage and your management level, and when you hit a hard season, and you will, the gap is small enough to get through it. That's how you stay in goats. If you've got questions or you want to talk through what this looks like for your specific situation, send me an email at millie@drycreekpastures.com. And if you haven't already grabbed the kidding due date chart over at goatwise.com/kidding-chart, go do that. It's free and it'll get you on the insider list where I share more of this kind of content between episodes. See you next week. Hey there, thanks for listening today. If this episode was helpful, share it with another producer who's raising goats. And if you haven't already, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more serious livestock owners find the show. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for veterinary advice. I'll see you next week here on GoatWise.